I'd like to do something a little differently today. Born into slavery on July 16th, 1862 in Holly Springs, Mississippi, and passing from this earth on the 25th of March, 1931 in Chicago, where she was forced to relocate. Ida B.Wells was an African-American journalist, abolitionist, and feminist who in the 1890s led a critically important anti-lynching campaign which helped expose the horrors and terrorism inflicted on African-American men in particular, but African-American communities in general throughout the United States, particularly in the South, but not exclusively to the South. She's well known for two famous publications, including Southern Horrors, Lynch Law in all its phases, and this book, which I own, known as The Red Record, which appeared under her married name later on when she married Barnett. The Red Record. This document in particular is a compilation of information that was available in newspapers at the time. These are the newspaper's own reports, and while they're horrific, they don't even begin to cover the horrors which she investigated heroically during her time in the 1890s, trying to unmask and expose this terrible situation that happened in the United States. Wells was an interesting person. She married, had a family, and was a writer, a journalist, had her own newspaper, which that along with her home was destroyed, and she was forced to move to Chicago. She focused her writing and reporting on racial segregation and inequality before she began focusing on the anti-lynching campaign. She was a contemporary and an associate of Frederick Douglass, Marcus Garvey, and many other prominent African Americans in the time period. She had a difficult start in life, as I mentioned, born into slavery. She also, at the age of 16, lost both of her parents and a young brother to yellow fever epidemic, which occurred in 1878. Nonetheless, she persevered. She got educated at Shaw University, which today is known as Rust College, and she learned how to use the pen in an effective way, writing her own newspaper. Quite an accomplishment for a woman, but especially for an African-American woman in this era. We hear today an awful lot about how the U.S. government has misused the Patriot Act and other mechanisms at its rules and laws and mechanisms at its disposal, including the FBI, to investigate Americans unlawfully. Yet this isn't the beginning of it. Back in the First World War, the United States government under President Woodrow Wilson placed Ida B. Wells under surveillance during the war because she was labeled a dangerous race agitator. Imagine that, a dangerous race agitator. The U.S. government put her under surveillance. So it wasn't only Dr. King who was later surveilled by the FBI. Long before the FBI existed, she was put under surveillance by the government itself. She later ran for the Senate in Illinois in 1930 and lost the seat. She ran as an independent. In a letter she wrote to a colleague, she once explained that she wasn't a Democrat because Democrats treated African Americans as if they were chattel. She could never be such. And she didn't become a Republican like her parents, who were Republicans in Reconstruction era South. She did not become a Republican because she felt that Republicans did not do enough to stop the horrors that happened. They may have ended slavery, they may have created emancipation, they may have ensured the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments went in place, but in her own words, she did not become a Republican because the Republicans did not stop the horrors. They could have done more. That's a fair statement. Ida B. Wells, two famous books, Southern Horrors, Lynch Law in all its phases. The first book she wrote, this one in 1892. Imagine this, in 1892, publishing this book, talking about lynching in the South. Courageous act on her part. And then, as I mentioned later, The Red Record, which is a compilation of actual news reports and the actual words that appeared in the newspapers about the horrors of lynching. She estimated that over 10,000 black men had been murdered during the lynching campaign in the 1890s. That's a conservative estimate, most likely. You can imagine the terror. Ida lived an interesting life, and here's a photograph of her with her family and 4 of her 6 children and some other family members. Quite an interesting woman. There's 2 famous quotes attributed to Ida B. Wells that I find interesting, and I remember them, and let me read them to you now. She once said that one had better die fighting against injustice than to die like a dog or a rat in a trap. That certainly makes sense to me, and we've heard variations of that quote made by other folks around the world throughout history. But one of the quotes that truly sits with me, and this is the role of journalists in the Fourth Estate, which seems to be lost on many journalists today, something she said. The way to right wrongs is to turn the light of truth upon them. Indeed it is. The best antiseptic is sunshine. And we should shine sunshine where it needs to be shined. So, on this International Women's Day, I'd like to give a tip of the hat and a sign of respect to Ida B.Wells Barnett, a true American, a patriot, someone who fought for right and injustice and exposed the truly horrific horrors of the lynching campaign of the 1890s, the height, the worst part of it. So with that, thank you for your time. Please subscribe to the channel if you enjoy it. Give us a like if you enjoy it. If you have comments are welcome. I respond to all comments. And if you have any suggestions for future videos, I'd be happy to entertain those. Thank you very much and have a pleasant day.